Very welcome back. If this is your day one, even though it's day two, you're very welcome. My name is Anton Savage. I'm going to be emceeing the rest of the day. If this is your day two, you're very welcome back. You will remember, therefore, yesterday, if this is your day two, that I was telling you the good news of us being nestled between Kevin Moran and Succession when it came to trending on Twitter. We went on to trend for most of the day and got nearly 1 million page impressions, which, given that that's a late toy show, it isn't half bad to show the level of interest that there is. The hashtag, as you can see up there, is hashtag future trials. So if you are on social media, you might just append that hashtag, and that'll again just give it a bit of a coalescence of all of the conversation that's happening around today's event. The other thing, while I'm in the reminder business, two other things. One, if you turned on the phone to check messages or anything like that during the coffee, could you just be sure to kick it back to silent? And the other thing is, if you haven't downloaded the app, you might do so. The QR code is on the back of your lanyard. If you have already downloaded the app, don't forget that you can use it if you want to send in questions, because we're going to be joined by Jim Breslin and Robert Watt in a couple of minutes, and undoubtedly there will be questions from the room for them. So if you want to do it via the app, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, we'll try to fit in as many as we can during the Q&A or during the session by getting roving microphones around. To kick off the next session, we heard a lot about the why of clinical trials. We're going to move now towards the how of clinical trials and the practicalities. And our first speaker is the newly appointed head of programs at the Institute. She was previously program manager at the Clinical Research Facility for a number of years. She has extensive experience of clinical research ecosystems, both nationally and, of course, here in the region and in Galway specifically. So will you please welcome Dr. Aideen O'Doherty. Thanks, Aideen.
I'm not sure how I can follow on from the presentations area this morning and also from Noreen, so I hope I deliver it okay. Díomh go léir agus fáilte arás. We've had a wonderful first day at our event and a very powerful start to this morning. I think we'll all agree. Thank you to all the speakers in this session coming. I'll start by saying that there is a wealth of experience locally in University of Galway and in Celta University Healthcare Group, evolving right from the early 2000s. And we saw a guide, the timeline from Teresa Maguire yesterday, and also reflected by the HRB again this morning by Mairead. And I just want to say, from the early 2000s, we evolved onto the HRB Clinical Research Facility, which first opened its doors in 2008. Above Mr Waffle was the cafe that Mairead mentioned this morning, across the road from the hospital. And also taking in the Curum Centre for Medical Devices, the Corrib Core Lab, Regenerative Medicine Institute and its associated Centre for Cell Manufacturing Ireland, the Health Innovation Hub, BioInnovate and the Trial Methodology Research Network and PPI Ignite, to name but a few. So we also see a wide and ever-increasing number of clinical trial networks and collaborative groups, either based in or strongly associated with our Galway community of researchers. We have access to a strong collaboration with many members from industry and other academic institutions. This is important to set the scene, really, of where we're starting now with the Institute for Clinical Trials. We have built clinical research, clinical trial infrastructure here at many levels here in Galway. We have the components to conduct high-quality clinical trials and have been successful to date in delivering a modest pipeline of clinical trials. Now, we're at a time of considerable change and opportunity, with investment in infrastructure that will allow us to scale up and conduct trials with international impact. So what does it actually take to run a clinical trial? Elements of this have been talked about throughout yesterday's programme and also today. Quality clinical research needs investment in technologies, in research infrastructure, in interventions, and most importantly, in people. Patients and research participants are at the heart of what we do. Their voice should be represented in the intelligent design and conduct of research studies. We heard the phrase yesterday, nothing about us without us. And we cannot and will not do this without those groups, without the patients. They're at the core of what we do. Clinically, we need access to representative patient groups with trial recruitment and all study activities conducted in a safe, regulated, monitored environment by an engaged and informed clinical team. We need expertise in methodology, study design, clinical trial, clinical protocol development, and intelligent case report form development, importantly. We need personnel driving and delivering on legal, data protection, regulatory, and ethics requirements. We need people to coordinate both international multi-centre trials and single-site studies, pulling together all the elements required to ensure compliance, efficiency, and trial delivery within agreed timelines and to target. We need core services in data management and statistics, ensuring data integrity and its accurate analysis. We need people in safety vigilance and clinical trial monitoring to ensure appropriate safety oversight. Biosamples need to be managed and analysed by appropriately trained people. Quality management systems and personnel who are experienced to drive them are crucial to ensure that all processes are followed appropriately. We need personnel to deliver programmes of education that ensure a critical mass of informed and invested investigators and a trained specialised research community. Looking around the room here, we have this expertise locally. We're very lucky. We have this on the ground. I won't embarrass you by asking you to put up your hands, but there is a lot of people in the audience who do these functions. We now need to scale this up. This is our opportunity. We can deliver decentralised methods for trial conduct and embrace new technologies to enhance the patient journey, inclusivity, and the speed at which we gather information. We will have an impact on study, startup, and completion times. We can deliver trial methodology to ensure efficiency and a speedier path to answering complex research questions. Environmental and research sustainability is critical. Under the Institute for Clinical Trials, we will be able to provide a national clinical trials unit, the first of its kind, the only one of its kind in Ireland, where key specialty services can be centralised. Pulling all of this together, this has been a national gap in research infrastructure. To achieve this, we need sustained national investment to be an international leader in clinical trials and to avoid falling further behind our European counterparts. A significant strength for us is evolving collaboration and partnership. You'll hear throughout our two-day programme many examples of this. And with the Institute, we have built a research centre with new world-class leadership under Peter, and which will be an accelerator to truly realise our ambition. Peter mentioned at the very start of this that we will be the best partners you will find, and I think that we should adopt that as our new byline for what we're about to do. Our vision of excellence is clear, and we have outlined a path to achieve this through the Institute for Clinical Trials. Gura Mahagif. Thank you.
Thanks, Aideen. We're going to stay with the how and a bit of practicality because we're now going to look at the experience of collaborative trials from somebody who is pretty much uniquely placed to be able to talk about collaborative trials. He leads the CONVINCE trial, which is, of course, one of the largest investigator-led trials in Europe, supported by CRF in Galway. He's president of the European Stroke Organisation and, of course, professor of neurology at University College Dublin. Please welcome Professor Peter Kelly. We gave you the long walk to build tension, Peter.
Morning, everyone. Really nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation and congratulations to the team on this fantastic morning and this fantastic initiative. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about trials in Europe and leading them from Ireland. But I'm going to start by telling you why stroke is important for human health. follow with the story of Convince, and then give you some reflections on what I've learned along the way. So these are data from the Global Burden of Disease study. And they really, I think, very clearly indicate the importance of stroke on a global level. Stroke is the second leading cause of death globally. You can see it here on the graph, I hope. Second only to coronary disease. And similar to cancer of the lung, breast, and the 4 most common GI cancers combined in terms of causes of death. When we add disability, stroke is the 3rd leading cause of death and disability after neonatal disorders and coronary disease. The regional director of the World Health Organization, Dr. Hans Kluge, has recently emphasized the importance of remembering non-communicable diseases in the context of a global pandemic. He emphasized that the death rate from stroke and coronary disease was approximately 2.5 to 3 times that of COVID during the years of the pandemic. Stroke alone accounted for about 75% more deaths than COVID globally during the years of the pandemic. The absolute numbers of stroke are rising quite alarmingly at a global level, regardless of whether we measure these as incidence or prevalence. This is because populations are growing, populations are aging, and global populations have increased exposure to risk factors in the Western diet and other lifestyles. Therefore, although we have made pretty stunning advances, all down to clinical trials, I should say, in terms of emergency treatments for stroke, prevention is really going to be a major strategy to stem the tide as populations grow and age. Atherosclerosis is the common underlying unifying pathology to most stroke and coronary disease. Originally, it was thought that atherosclerosis was primarily a disorder of lipid metabolism due to accumulation of lipids in the arterial wall. But in recent decades, it has become increasingly clear and is now understood that, in fact, atherosclerosis can be considered more of a chronic inflammatory condition associated with the accumulation of modified lipids in the arterial wall. And what this does is it changes the way we think of the condition, and there are quite interesting analogies to other chronic inflammatory conditions, such as rheumatoid arthritis. And this opens up a whole different way of thinking that anti-inflammatory therapies might in fact really be game changers in terms of preventing stroke and coronary disease. So the first proof of concept trial that demonstrated this was a trial called CANTOS. And CANTOS was published, I think, back in 2017, if my memory serves me correct, in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what CANTOS did was it repurposed a monoclonal antibody, which has been in use for several years by our colleagues in rheumatology for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. And it asked the question, could this monoclonal antibody against interleukin-1 beta, when added on top of standard vascular preventive medications like statins, aspirin, antihypertensive medications, etc., could it prevent recurrent coronary events, stroke, and vascular death in a stable population with coronary disease? And indeed it did. So in the pre-specified primary analysis, in a population otherwise treated with very high rates of modern preventive therapies, canakinumab, the monoclonal antibody, reduced the rates of what we call MACE, major adverse cardiovascular events, by 15%. And the benefit of canakinumab was even greater, 30 to 35% in people identified as responders based on their profiles of circulating inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. Now, the problem with canakinumab is that A, it's expensive, costs about $200,000 a year to fund it in the United States. B, it's an injectable, so not very convenient for patients. And also in this trial, there were some problems with opportunistic infection and safety. But could other anti-inflammatory agents be easier to take, less expensive, and safer? And in this regard, there has been huge interest in this drug called colchicine. Now, when I was in medical school a little while ago now, we always thought of colchicine, and we were always taught about colchicine as an anti-gout drug. Note, another inflammatory arthropathy, right? So the problem with colchicine that we were all taught of was that it was given in relatively high doses for acute attacks of gout and wasn't tolerated very well by patients in this setting. But it turns out that colchicine can be given safely at low dose for decades, and indeed has been for conditions such as familial Mediterranean fever and Behçet's disease. To my mind, colchicine is a very interesting compound, bears many similarities to aspirin, which we all think of as a prototypic, globally available anti-atherosclerotic drug. Colchicine has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It was first purified from the crocus. Aspirin, by comparison, was from the willow. And it was first identified and is first mentioned in the Ebers Papyrus, which was discovered near the Egyptian pyramids near Luxor in Egypt. So it's been around for a very, very long time. It has several clinical advantages. As I mentioned, it's usually well tolerated and safe at low dose. We have a lot of experience with it. It's very inexpensive and can be given by mouth. Back in 2013, a group of cardiologists from Canada and Australia published a trial called the LODECO trial, where they gave low-dose colchicine on top of standard preventive medications to patients with stable coronary disease, and reported that it prevented the occurrence of future coronary events and stroke and death by about 2/3. Now, this was a very large effect size, or a very large benefit. But in 2014, with Martin and a group of collaborators, we began to think about a trial of testing colchicine in patients with ischemic stroke. And basically, this was the CONVINCE trial and was designed in patients with non-cardioembolic stroke. We would randomize them to low-dose colchicine versus usual care on a background of best medical care. For budgetary reasons, we couldn't afford a placebo. We were ambitious. The sample size was 3,154 patients. So this was the CONVINCE trial, and over the last years, we have scaled this up and run it at 152 centres in 13 European countries and Canada. UCD has been the sponsor for the trial. The project office has been based at the other CRC site, the one that Peter wasn't talking about when he was talking about the wealthy, well-heeled location in Dublin. This one is in the inner city, the north inner city of Dublin, in quite a gritty location, I would say. We've had fantastic partnership. I would say that Galway are already the best partners you can have in terms of the data management for this trial, which has been ably run by Aideen and her team. And this was the flagship trial of the Stroke Trials Network Ireland, which was really a collaboration of 10 hospitals and 6 universities funded under the HRB Trials Network Initiative. We randomized our first patient just before Christmas 2016, and we enrolled our last patient in November of last year. Here you can see the recruitment curve. You can see, of course, there was a bit of a stall due to COVID, where we had to pause recruitment. But we feel it has been quite an achievement to recruit this many patients, basically from a standing start, led from Ireland. The top 5 countries of recruitment on a per capita basis Ireland has been far and away the leading country for recruitment for this trial. But we have had magnificent partnership from our colleagues in other European countries. In absolute terms, the UK has been the leading recruiter with just over 1,200 patients recruited, and the other main recruiting countries have been Germany, Belgium, and Spain. Collectively, with Ireland and the UK, those 5 countries have recruited about 90% of the participants. Now, while we were recruiting for CONVINCE, coronary trials were reporting out. And we had several reported in the New England Journal of Medicine and other major journals over that period of time. And in a meta-analysis of colchicine therapy in coronary patients, indeed, low-dose colchicine was found to reduce major adverse cardiovascular events by 26% overall, a highly statistically significant result. And as a result, we're beginning to see colchicine being included in international guidelines on top of other preventive medications. Also, while we were running CONVINCE, other groups began to set up their own trials in stroke. So now we have 4 other international trials that are, most of them just beginning, one in Canada, one in France, one in China, and one in Australia. So just to reflect a little about how this was achieved, as I say, in Ireland from a standing start. Well, it's great that Mairead O'Driscoll is here and spoke earlier, and I think CONVINCE is an excellent example of the success of the HRB strategy in supporting trials in practice. So one of the key enablers was the Irish Stroke Trials Network, which, as you can see, really recruited very strongly. But we couldn't do this in isolation, and Ireland can't exist in isolation for these trials, and it's very important that we take this on board. So simultaneously, I was working with the European Stroke Organization, and what we did there was we joined together existing stroke trials networks and created new national stroke trials networks across Europe to form basically a European super network, which we call the ESO Trials Alliance. And CONVINCE was run within ESOTA, as are other trials at the moment. The infrastructure support from the UCD Clinical Research Centre and the CRF in Galway was essential. We also operated a franchise model, particularly in the UK, Belgium, and Germany. So in effect, we had sub-offices of the trial operating in clinical trials units and clinical research centres in these countries. So although there was very close coordination between the central project office in Ireland and these units, in effect, they operated semi-independently to run the trial in their own countries without any compromise on the quality of trial procedures or processes or of data management. And funding is absolutely essential. So with this, again, I commend the HRB. They funded about 70% of this trial. The budget for these trials, regardless of how pragmatic they are, when we do these large trials, we're looking at budgets in the region of 5 to 10 million euros. The HRB were extraordinarily supportive. They were the first mover and persuaded other European funders to come in. We were able to persuade them to come in because the HRB had taken the first step. And we also got funding from Germany and Belgium as well. I would also say that the HRB were extraordinarily supportive during the COVID pandemic and very flexible in terms of adjusting timelines, etc. But it's not all roses and light, unfortunately. There are challenges on the horizon that we're currently grappling with at the moment. So a big one remains funding. I did a quick calculation in the coffee break there on the proportion of EU Horizon funding that is being made available for non-oncology, non-COVID trials at the moment. You may be surprised to hear that it is less than 2% of the entire 8.2 billion of the Horizon budget is being made available for these categories of trials. And this is despite the fact that the population of Europe is about double the population of the United States. If we compare the ring-fenced funding in the EU Horizon programme to the funding available for trials in the NIH, the EU funding is minuscule by comparison. So given that we have to compete hard for the very limited EU funding and wait a long time, we have waited 4 years for the first call for non-oncology, non-COVID trials under the Horizon programme. We are very dependent on national funders. And unfortunately, we have difficulty with coordinating national funders at an international level to do multi-center international trials. So we have several countries which have national funding programs dedicated for trials in the region of 1 to 1.5 million euros. But there are very tight restrictions on how that funding can be used. The funding is typically directed exclusively or near exclusively internally, and there is little coordination between European national funders in terms of linking together their programs so that multinational trials in Europe can be conducted. The second issue is contracts, and this was alluded to earlier in the talks this morning. In scenarios where funding is of a fixed period, for example, in the EU, funding is strictly limited to 5 years. Delays in signing contracts between institutions, etc., can become an existential threat to delivering trials successfully. We have had experiences of it taking between 1 and 2 years for contracts to be signed within Ireland and outside Ireland. So we really need more efficient processes to sort out our contracts. There are a very large number of people to acknowledge and thank for all of this effort, far too many to thank in person, but thank you for your attention.
We're going to stay on the practical side of things and the experience of running trials. In this instance, we're going to talk about cell therapy trials led from the University of Galway, and we're going to do that thanks to the good offices of the director of the REMEDI trial at the University of Galway, also consultant endocrinologist at Galway University Hospitals, Professor Tim O'Brien. All yours, Tim.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to thank Peter for the invitation to participate, the opportunity to participate, and congratulate Martin and Martina on launching this institute within the College of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences. Peter, we're really excited by you being here. So none of it's fake. We've watched with envy your accomplishments in UCD over the years, and we're delighted to welcome you here to the West. We also look forward to working with what will be a sister institute in the College of Science and Engineering, more on the discovery side. And certainly we work in a realm in between discovery and translation. So the early phase clinical trials. So a conflict of interest statement. I'm a founder, director, and equity holder in Orpton Therapeutics, which is a University of Galway spin-out company. And I will be describing some data from that company during the presentation. I put stem cells in a broader context of regenerative medicine. This is a definition from the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine annual report in 2012. So regenerative medicine aims to augment, repair, replace, or regenerate organs and tissues that have been damaged by disease, injury, or natural aging. And it represents a new paradigm in human health with the potential to resolve unmet medical needs by addressing underlying causes of disease. So this new paradigm relates to the fact that most therapies today focus on delay of disease progression and prevention of associated complications. And regenerative medicine is an interdisciplinary field translating basic science into regenerative technologies with curative intent. Regenerative medicine, therefore, has the potential to restore the patient with chronic disease to health and may represent a disruptive technology. So these are the technologies that underpin regeneration, stem cells, gene therapy, biomaterials, medical device technology. And at REMEDI and here with colleagues in Galway, we're interested in particular in the convergence of those technologies. And this will provide challenges for all of us, including regulators, health services, to think of future therapies which are genetically modified stem cells delivered through a medical device and also containing a biomaterial which can impact the behavior of the cells, for instance. Mechanisms of action of stem cells are shown on this slide. So we all know that stem cells, by definition, can become other tissues. So that could be one mechanism of action, direct differentiation from the stem cell phenotype to heart, bone, cartilage. But they also have paracrine mechanisms, so they can secrete factors. They're like cell factories, which can deliver angiogenic factors, anti-inflammatory factors, immunomodulatory factors. And the third area I mentioned there, which is been a focus of colleagues here in Galway like Matt Griffin, Thomas Ritter, Rod Caredig, that is the regenerative immunotherapeutics. So stem cells can modify the immune response in a pro-healing manner. You can't really talk about stem cell trials without infrastructure. Under PRTLI funding from the Irish government in 2005, PRTLI 3, Galway placed in its bid a GMP cell manufacturing facility, CCMI, and that really is one of our unique selling points in Galway, and to have a GMP facility in an academic institution, which allows us to generate cells for human application. And I show this slide at many presentations because it represents 5 years of work to get a license to manufacture cells for human application. So this was given by the Irish Medicines Board as it was, so the Health Product Regulatory Authority, which we heard from yesterday, and a body we engaged substantially with in our facility. And I'd like to credit Andrew Finnerty, who's in the audience, and Miriam Holohan for the two people who drove the successful application for that license and who've maintained that license with annual audits and inspections in an academic environment. So REMEDI was a research institute which Frank Barry and I established in 2004 with funding from SFI. And we had 3 goals. One was to undertake basic research in stem cell biology. The second was to develop a clinical trial pipeline, and the third was to commercialize the outputs. And the byline there at the bottom is really fundamental and key to our modus operandi, that is from research to human therapy. So all of our discovery research, all of our preclinical laboratory research is undertaken with the concept that it's going to be part of a regulatory dossier to get into doing first-in-human and early-phase clinical trials. So that emphasis is slightly different to an academic emphasis to publish a paper. Our emphasis is on generate the data in a manner that regulators will approve to allow a phase 1 first-in-human study be undertaken. And with university and state support, we assembled a group of PIs from a broad range of areas who bring to bear on these translational efforts their area of expertise. So we've referred many times to the multidisciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity. And in addition, we create the infrastructure. So the infrastructure provided by the state. So if you, this is I don't know whether the pointer is actually working or not, but PRTLI, top left, PRTLI, bottom left, top right, PRTLI, all government, state-funded infrastructure to allow the people that I alluded to earlier to work. And then on the bottom right is a part of the activity that's passionate to me, which is the hospital. So within the hospital, we have a Galway blood and tissue establishment, which we procure stem cells under license and under regulation from the HPRA. And the people who work in that entity, Amjad Hayat, Joy Buckley, Sean Nocton, and Mags Tarpey. They're full-time HSE employees, but our research path from research to therapy cannot happen without their involvement. So we have the people, we have the infrastructure, all provided by state funding, and then we go and compete on the European stage. And these are some of the EU consortia which REMEDI PIs have coordinated. There's about 80 million euro worth of EU funding. The GMP facility cost 8 million to build, so it's a reasonable return. And none of these would have been funded and led out of Galway without the GMP facility, that facility which was paid for by our taxpayers' money back in 2005 through the HEA PRTLI program. I'm happy to see now that IDA have listed cell and gene therapy as a kind of area of interest for them to promote into the country. And based on our well-established biopharma track record in Ireland, and now we see companies appearing in the ecosystem, which will both SMEs and multinationals. On the far right bottom, there's Orbsen Therapeutics, which is one of our university spin-out companies. So I'll turn to one of the cells that we use most commonly, the mesenchymal stem cell. And this is a slide from Anne Ryan in the College of Science and Engineering, which is a kind of a word cloud of common topics that appear out of a SciVal source. So you can see MSCs are one of the most common areas that we publish in this institution, along with probably percutaneous coronary intervention and others. But so the MSC is a very, very large focus of our activities. Why are we interested in MSCs? They're easily obtained and they can differentiate to 3 specific tissues: bone, cartilage, fat. They have paracrine mechanisms, like I mentioned earlier, so they make stuff. And this stuff is anti-inflammatory, pro-regenerative, pro-healing. And this third element that I mentioned earlier, immune reprogramming, the possibility to deliver the cells, and the cells will alter the immune system with pro-healing results. Now, I'm a diabetologist, so I work in the hospital with patients with diabetes, and I'm interested in using regenerative approaches of stem cells to help diabetic complications. I couldn't have done it without these 4 individuals: Frank Barry, Mary Murphy, Linda Howard, Cindy Coleman. All moved here in the early 2000s. And to me, they're kind of the paradigm, the exemplar for collaborative collegial research. They're generous of their time and their expertise. And there are many people in this institution now who work in areas of research directly driven by Frank, Mary, and colleagues. So I'd like to thank them publicly in this forum. Diabetes, this is the global pandemic. We speak of pandemics. It was before COVID. We were starting to talk about the diabetes pandemic. And no matter where in the world you look, the prevalence is high and the prevalence is increasing. So estimated 700 million people in the next 10 years will be afflicted by diabetes. And the main issue with diabetes are complications of the condition, be they kidney complications, eye, heart, etc. And I've been interested in using our from research to therapy paradigm in exploring MSCs as a treatment for these complications. And I'll just give one example in the interest of time of MSCs and their use in diabetic kidney disease. And this started with an EU-funded program, PureStem, coordinated by Frank Barry, a team led by Steve Elliman, who's a CSO for Orbsen Therapeutics, discovered on the surface of MSCs CD362, a marker which could be used to fractionate MSCs to a highly pure cell population. So that's European funding allowing discovery of this technology, which is then patented and results in the spin-out of Orbsen Therapeutics. Then the second EU program built on that, Red Star, reducing diabetic damage through stromal cell administration. We did the preclinical studies using that cell in diabetic kidney disease. And again, in the interest of time, I won't go through because I've been warned to stick to time. It shows essentially efficacy in animal models, it shows safety in animal models, and it shows biodistribution which regulators are satisfied with. The stem cells are not ending up in places that they shouldn't be, where they could cause harm. So all of that research done in Red Star was done with a view to developing the regulatory dossier to submit to the regulator to get the trial approved. And that resulted in the third, this kind of sequential EU consortium called NEFSTROM. And each of these fund about 5 million euros. So they allow phase 1B early stage studies to be done in terms of the amount of money they provide, unlike what Peter was referring to earlier. And again, in the interest of time, I won't go through all the parts of NEFSTROM, but I'll mention the human phase 1B/2A clinical trial. They're the 4 clinical partners across Europe, and the trial was approved under a European mechanism called the voluntary harmonized procedure. So it's approved by the Italian regulator, and then the rest of the regulators will agree to that. And then we have cell manufacturing in a number of different centers that we have to coordinate and develop SOPs where they can all manufacture in the same manner. So this is the investigational medicinal product. It's a cryopreserved CD362 selected allogeneic bone marrow. So we take healthy volunteer bone marrow, sort the cells, culture expand them in this bioreactor from Terumo, a Japanese company. So this allows a lot of automated manufacture of the cells in our GMP facility and our sister GMP facilities in Europe. And that's the product. It's a bag of cells that we will inject intravenously on one occasion to patients with diabetic kidney disease with deteriorating kidney function in spite of current optimal therapy. And this was the NEFSTROM multi-center clinical trial. The local leader is Matt Griffin, Professor of Transplant Biology here. As I have a conflict with the company, I'm not involved in recruitment of patients or oversight of patients, so I'm presenting this on behalf of Matt Griffin. And I should mention Veronica McInerney, because none of these clinical trials would have happened without Veronica McInerney. And we started this during COVID. We started recruiting these patients during COVID, and the sponsor, the coordinator, is in Bergamo. All of you will remember what Bergamo was like in the early stages of COVID. So it certainly resulted in challenges in recruitment of patients. But here in Galway, Veronica and the CRF couldn't have been done without CRF. And just, we've only analysed the first data set, the first dose cohort, and have seen essentially that the orb cell treated single injection group have less decline in kidney function than the placebo group, as shown there in the estimated GFR. And then if you look at what happened to the GFR before, over on the left, the GFR is declining in both groups, and then the rate of decline is slowed in the orb cell bone marrow MSC treated group. So that's phase 2A data suggesting that a single intravenous injection of these cells will slow the rate of decline in the GFR. And interestingly, Matt Griffin and other transplant immunologists involved in this have shown that with the injection of Orb-Cel-M, 18 months later, the decline in regulatory T cells seen in diabetes is abrogated by the injection, which was given once 18 months earlier. So it seems to have an alteration of the T cell profile over a long period of time. So for subjects enrolled in the first dose cohort of the NEFSTROM trial, the safety and tolerability of the cell treatment was established. Over 18 months, the rate of decline in GFR was less for recipients of the cell, and the percentage of Tregs, this to me is one of the more exciting observations, and that has implications for multiple diseases, in the blood remains stable in Orb-Cel-M treated patients. So the next stage of NEFSTROM, that's phase 2A, done with state and European funding support for an SME, Orbsen Therapeutics, but it's now in the process of raising 60 million to do the phase 2B trial. And if you have positive phase 2b data, the trial design is finalized. There'll be plans, if that's positive, to look for adaptive licensing, and then move on to do the definitive phase 3, while the adaptive licensing will allow sale of the product. These are some of the trials that are ongoing. So again, in a 15-minute presentation, which I'm seeing now on the screen in front of me, time's up. There's big things saying time's up. So I won't go through all of these trials, but the first one I'll mention, it was a trial in critical limb ischemia, and it was the first one we did here, first one done in Ireland, of somatic cell transplantation for patients who were scheduled for amputation to see if you could preserve limbs, essentially. That was done with a HRB SFI Partnered Award, which were interesting awards. That happened, I think, just on one occasion. But it couldn't be done again without Martin O'Donnell in particular and the CRF, because I was treading new water here, doing first-in-human studies. This was not with a company product. This was with non-proprietary MSCs. And I'm hugely grateful to Martin for his help in getting that phase 1b in critical limb ischemia finished. And then the other one I'll mention is ADAPOA, the second one there. That's Frank Barry's trial. Recruited now over 200 patients, so it's a phase 2b. So that's well on the path, and I await the results with interest to see will it then go to phase 3, because that then is the end of this paradigm of from research to human therapy. Do your research in the laboratory, discover things, do them in a manner which is regulatorily compliant, and then do the early phase clinical trials and advance through phase 2 and 3. It's a 20-year process in cell therapy, so it's not an overnight process by any means. So very briefly, with time up, I just want to mention how this infrastructure, this GMP facility, well, for me, has been a labor of love in some respects, but it's a unique aspect of our infrastructure here. How will it be used in the coming years? Combinatorial products I mentioned. So this is a phase 1b trial we completed in Copenhagen with a combined device cell combination applied to non-healing diabetic foot ulcers. Gary Duffy, interested in biomaterials and beta cells. All will have to be generated in a GMP compliant manner in order to do any translation into phase 1 trials. Sanbing Shen, my colleague Sanbing, who runs our induced pluripotent stem cell lab, probably one of the most exciting discoveries in science in the last 30 years. You know, Yamanaka being able to convert a skin fibroblast to a pluripotent cell, so you can make anything from that skin fibroblast, your heart, your lungs, your kidney, your liver, and we want to transplant those cells. We want to do the first-in-man studies. The first in man has just been reported in Japan in a blinding retinal degeneration condition. So our GMP facility is going to be required to do those iPS-derived transplantation studies. Cassia Weissel, microRNA expert in the Department of Physiology, she will need a GMP facility to see microRNA therapeutics, progress. Maeve Brennan, Galway University Foundation, senior research lecturer, interested in the secretome of the MSCs and their therapeutic potential in musculoskeletal disease. She will need a GMP facility to translate into phase 1b, phase 2 trials. And then one of probably the most exciting areas of combined cell and gene therapy, CAR-T and CAR-NK, Michael O'Dwyer and Yanis Krachik. We've been designated by the Department of Health to be a CAR-T center. We have the infrastructure, we have the capacity, we have the people, we have a licensed facility, so now we just need to do it. So the ecosystem for cell therapy trials is present. The total translational infrastructure, people, place, and processes. And we have the university, we have REMEDI and Quorum within it, CCMI, the clinical research facility, the hospital, Sale to University Healthcare Group, and then spin-out companies. I mentioned Orbsen Therapeutics. ONC it's a university spin-out founded by Michael O'Dwyer. But this needs to be embedded now in this new institute, this Institute for Clinical Trials. And I think we can move to the next stage with the support of the infrastructure that Peter is going to set up. These are the people who are present on this day outside our HRB clinical research facility. Broad range, unique skill sets, many funded on short-term contracts with a skill set which can easily diffuse out into the private sector. And these are some of my colleagues in their areas of, but the funders. So Horizon 2020, even FP7, we were involved in FP7, HRB, SFI, IRC, the university, the health sector, a team of people, an ecosystem which hopefully will generate new therapies and go from research to human therapy. Don't stop at the publication. Bring it into human translation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Come ahead. Okay, folks, I was going to say that it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next two speakers, but given the theme, you won't know if I'm faking it or not, seems to be the trend. But I'll say it nonetheless. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back our next two speakers, because they have been up here before, but we're going to get into a bit of detail of the questions around the Institute itself. And for that, I'm going to bring back up Professor Peter Doran and Professor Martin O'Donnell. And because of their rank and stature, we're going to let them sit through this session rather than having to stand all the way. So, gents, you can pick any one of the seats that you like the look of. And if you could grab a microphone as well. Again, there is a fair selection of those that you can choose from. And what we might do is start with the most logical question of all, which is, when it comes to the Galway University Institute of Clinical Trials, why now?
I'll start. Is that okay? Great. Yeah, why now? I think we're at a time where there's a lot of alignment, Anton. So an alignment with the ambition and the strategy of the University of Galway. Alignment with a time where the medtech industry, particularly in this region, is so strong. But also an alignment with where we now have the emergence of the two institutes, as has been mentioned. An earlier Biomedical Discovery Institute, and then an Institute for Clinical Trials. So I think the why now is a lot of things have lined up. We're in a really, really opportune moment to be able to make a significant difference. So to me, that's the why now. We're taking advantage of alignment. We're taking advantage of opportunity. And we're also building on strengths. This is not our first rodeo, both in terms of the expertise here at the university, in terms of what I was involved in my previous institution. We have that expertise. We're building that leadership. The time is now, and our patients need it.
Martin, do you want to chip in on that?
Sure. I mean, again, just to emphasize, I guess timing is everything. As Peter has referenced, we have built a really strong clinical research, clinical trial environment. It's time to join that together, to create efficiencies, to ensure we don't have redundancies, and that we have a central core of standards of quality. We also look to the biomedical research environment. So if you take the example of the Quorum SFI Centre, as they transitioned from Quorum 1 to Quorum 2, the key shift was moving into clinical trials. We have the same with BioInnovate. So a lot of the decisions and the investments and strategic direction in our institution and other institutions that were made 20, 15 years ago have necessitated the need to develop an early phase clinical trial program. What we're seeing is that those clinical trials are leaving this country. They're going to Eastern Europe, going to many other centres. When you speak to the people leading them in either industry or within the environment within the universities, they want to do them here. I'm not saying we'll do all of the trials, but we want to do more. But even if we don't conduct our trials, we have an obligation to support them in conducting them, even if they're elsewhere. The other part is a critical mass of people. So what you need is, and certainly things we've invested in, Peter, where he worked previously, heavily invested in, is that careers in clinical trials are now a reality in this country. So there's a need, there's now a workforce of critical mass of expertise. And one of the things, particularly with Peter's recruitment, is we're adding dimensionality to our centre so that we're not dependent. And often I was speaking to Mairead yesterday, 10 years ago, the conversation was, oh my God, if that person left that centre, clinical trials would collapse, right? So what we have now is a cohort, a caucus of people where if one individual person leaves, they can be replaced. The agenda moves
Even
forward.
Peter?
Not Peter, but we can't say that to him yet. Although we're going to ask Tim to clone him.
Well, can I ask, Martin, how do you, the fact that there is an opportunity, and there's an opportunity at scale, I think there is general consensus, and all that we have seen shows that. How do you quantify what that opportunity is so that it's actually realistic and achievable?
Sure. We're quantifying it, unfortunately, with respect to deficits, which is the number of clinical trials that are leaving this country that could be done here. We're looking at comparable competitors in other countries. So, there is a quantitative data business aspect to this. So if you take Norway, Denmark, similar sized countries when it comes to population, when it comes to third level expertise, they are significantly ahead in their delivery of clinical trials. If you look at UK, absolutely a much larger country, Brexit has presented us with opportunities, both to collaborate with UK, but also the connection into Europe. So what we're seeing is that there's a moment in time, provided the stars align. One is you take a leadership role, you message it, you announce it, you have the people to deliver on it. And the other, if you take the example of the UK, is that there's a sustainable model of funding. So if companies, if academic organizations are to invest in this country for clinical trials, they need to know that there's a secure future, that there's a model of investment and funding that will be in place in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. So it's that certainty and that consistency that we would deliver.
Some of which obviously we can put to Robert Watt and Jim Breslin when they join us in a couple of minutes. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just one thing on that as well. I think there's also a national dimension. So we can reflect and compare ourselves badly to other countries. And that certainly can be useful, but there's also significant potential here. In terms of the numbers, in my last institution, we were doing about 8 times the amount of clinical research studies. So that's our target. So that's our immediate target. Not to double, not to triple, but multiply it by a factor of 8. There's lots of potential in this region. There's lots of investigators of great quality. By wrapping an infrastructure and support around them, I really believe we will achieve very significant growth, regardless of what happens at a national level.
Can you expand slightly on this location, both the region and the university? Why Galway?
Yeah, I can personalize that a little bit if that helps, seeing as I'm only here. Because why Galway is something I thought about for most of last year. And I thought about it and ultimately answered that question by looking at a few things. First of all, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the people that were here. There's some really unique elements of the research environment here in Galway. Tim has just told us about CCMI and REMEDI. Patrick Cerise is joining us here today, the leader of the Corrib group with other colleagues. There's a very well-established SFI centre in medical devices. So we've a lot of the ingredients to be primed for translation. Putting an institute for clinical trials on top of that, to me, is an extraordinary opportunity. We can take all of the scientific outputs from those programs and apply it to our patients. So to me, that's one of the reasons why Galway. But the other part I must mention is that there's an environment here. I mentioned it last night. There's a warmth here, and there's a strategic ambition here that I certainly bought into, and I think all of our colleagues here do likewise.
And the weather, Peter. Let's not knock the weather while we're
at it. The weather, of course.
Can I reflect back yesterday on Anna Torres's presentation? Because one of the things that she talked about was pragmatic reality informing itself into her original level of ambition. What about the same with your situation? How do you actually get it delivered? What do you see as the key milestones? What do you see as obstacles or stumbling blocks that you will have to overcome?
Yeah, well, so certainly from my perspective, part of that is delivering on top of what we already have. There is a well-established clinical research facility, initially led by Martin and more recently led by Andrew Smith, that has already done a lot of this work. The processes are there, the systems have been created. So the first thing is scale. How do we scale that up? How do we build on what we already have? And I think for me, that's where a lot of my experience from my previous role in UCD, but also the experience of our investigators in cell therapy trials like Tim has just mentioned, in cardiology and other areas, we can really build on those. So we're not entirely starting anew. I think what we are doing though, Anton, and this is the different ingredient, is we're setting an ambition and a vision that we think will really motivate the community. We're investing in making sure we have the best people, the best processes, the best place to do trials. And I think all of those ingredients will make sure that we're able to deliver.
Well, Martin, Peter refers to your previous experience. From that experience, what do you see as the key landmarks that you would be hoping for in the coming months and years?
Sure. I might just add to the last point, which is, our track record in this country of a commitment to clinical trials and fixing deficits is there. If you go back 15 years, regulatory authority ethics were unpredictable and slow. There's been huge investment and improvement to the point that many external people would hold certainly HPRA as the exemplar in deliverables and partnership with researchers. So certainly it's about our ability. We can have problems, but if we have a track record of fixing it, and I think we have itemized where the barriers are and how we can fix it.
Can I ask on that note, and as a final thing, what support, help, facilitation, presence of fellow travelers do you need?
Yeah, I guess this is where the rubber hits the road. The College of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences are investing significantly in the creation of this institute. Under Martin and Martina's leadership, the need has been identified, the commitment has been made. So that gets us off the ground. What we do need, what we clearly need, and we need this not just here in Galway, but nationally, is we need additional resourcing. If we look across the water to the UK, through the NHS, they have funded significantly the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research, and provided an annual budget, a part of the health system budget, that is ring-fenced for clinical research. We don't have that. Our support here comes from rolling initiatives like the health research boards, through the investment by our institutions, and then also then through the project funding that's made available.
And why do you see the ring fencing of a specific budget percentage as significant or as necessary?
It's vital because it gives us predictability, it gives us sustainability. Trying to manage and plan an infrastructure on short-term rolling budgets is incredibly difficult. It doesn't allow us to commit to our best people. We're never consistent. We're always trying to patch things up. As Martin said, we're trying to fix deficits all the time. We're not able to offer our staff the career structure that they require. We're not able to give people certainty. If we really want to change the game, and if we want to make sure that Irish patients have the best outcome because they're cared for in a clinical research intensive environment, that consistency of resourcing has to happen. One of the interesting things that's conversations that's happening globally is that clinical research is no longer a nice to have, no longer an added extra. It's something that should be part of routine healthcare. Patients should have an expectation that when they attend one of our hospitals, that they will be enrolled in studies. To make that a reality, to protect that from the vagaries of cyclical funding, we have to get to a point where we commit long-term. A commitment that in our case, our institution has already made, and I'm incredibly grateful for that commitment. But we have to do more, and we have to be more certain.
And presumably that also has the effect of to some degree baking research into the health system itself, because it becomes a component part rather than an appendix or an add-on. Martin, do you want to get final word on the same topic, the things that you need in terms of support, assistance, facilitation as the Institute goes forward?
Yeah, I think to, again, double down on what Peter has said, you know, it's clinical research. We tend to focus on the research word when in actual fact this is driven by clinical. You know, there are many things which are worth saying more than once, and this is that clinical healthcare systems have research infused within them, informed by them, owned by them, deliver better care. And if we had to point to one thing, it is around a model of sustained investment. And that's not just us saying it. The proof in the pudding is when you look at the UK and NIHR, when you look at the services that they're delivering, and separating research from delivery of high quality clinical care just doesn't happen. They're absolute bedfellows.
I'm going to ask, gents, you to rejoin us when we've had a chance to talk to the two Secretaries General, and we'll do a shared Q&A at that point, and we'll open it to the floor. What we might do before I invite up Robert Watt and Jim Breslin is just do another moment to remind ourselves of the ultimate purpose of what it is that we're discussing.
My name is Kate Cameron, and I've been on a clinical trial for stage 4 bowel cancer since 2018. So that is it's over 5 years now, and it has completely changed my life. It was absolutely out of the blue because I virtually had no symptoms, maybe very, very occasionally just felt a bit of discomfort. Didn't think anything about it, went for what I felt was a routine colonoscopy. And after the biopsy, I was told at the beginning of January 2017 that it was stage 4 bowel cancer. And it just didn't seem real at all. The stage 4 part, it had metastasized into my liver. So I went up to Dublin and had surgery on my liver, and then went back in the autumn and completed the chemotherapy. Unfortunately, just as that was coming to an end, I had a scan and it showed up it had spread again into the peritoneum. So that was again just such a shock. You think you're counting down the numbers of chemotherapy that you have to do, and you just can't wait for that to be over. So it was an absolute blow, yeah. But I am so grateful to Dr. Leonard, because with fast thinking, he put into action a course that I was able to go on a clinical trial going into the new year, 2018. I started on immunotherapy, which completely changed my life. And I'm actually given 2 types of immunotherapy. One has been around for a while and has been used successfully, I believe. And the other drug, that is the trial. That's having the 2 together, and it's administered very painlessly through a port that I have inserted in my chest. It's not obtrusive. It's not invasive. It's just a little pinprick, and it goes through my port. So it's a very little price to pay for what it's given me, I have to say, and my children, because they've got their mum back. I had and still have virtually no side effects at all. Before on the chemo, as people who have been through it know, it just affects your mouth, your taste buds, your sense of smell, all the things that help us enjoy our lives. And it was just wonderful to be able to taste food, cook food, smell food, and had the energy to go for a proper walk and a proper swim, and even going traveling. It was just completely brought me back to the land of the living. I think no matter how bad it seems or how bad the news becomes, just don't give up, because everything is moving on at an incredible speed. So much research is being done, and I feel that I'm living proof of that, it does work. And not to be afraid of it, give it a go, really, because sometimes you get to the point where nothing can be worse. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of it.
There you go, just a small reminder of what it is that we are ultimately talking about and the effect that it can have. Okay, so guys, Martin and Peter, you are off the hook. I'm going to ask you back up in a couple of seconds, but before that I'm going to invite up the Secretaries General, respectively, of the Department of Health and the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovations and Science, that being, of course, Jim Breslin of the latter and Robert Watt of the former. Jim and Robert, folks. And again, you have a vast spectrum of seats to choose from, so take whichever one you like the look of. Thank you very much for attending. Can we begin just with your own views and the views, therefore, of your respective departments in relation to research in general, clinical trials in particular, their significance and their significance from your department's view? Jim, maybe you might kick off.
Thanks, Anton. It's kind of two questions, because you've asked me my own views and then you've asked me my department's views. And my own views are, if you'd asked me this last night as I was driving down, I would have given you a cerebral and conceptual answer as to how research is required across the full gamut of an economy, and in particular in knowledge-intensive areas like health. But Noreen spoke this morning, and it was like a window into my past, because she spoke about her experience in Crumlin. And Owen Smith, who's here, so I encountered Owen maybe 20 years ago at this stage. And at the time, haematology-oncology services for kids were split across two sites in Dublin. It was a microcosm of the paediatric hospital issue. And we looked to bring those together, and in the business case for it, and there was quite a lot of controversy around that. Not everybody wanted to come together. We looked to bring them together. That involved expanding St. John's Ward, putting new theatres into Crumlin, putting ICU beds. And Owen was insistent, every bottom of the business case, there was like research nurse, data analyst. And they're the things that very easy to put your pen through. But he convinced me that the same culture that would drive service quality is the same culture that we needed for research. So his commitment to research was all about service quality. And there was a shakiness to the service then. There were children getting their chemotherapy cancelled. Like, things have moved on a lot. And so in addressing the research agenda, he was absolutely clear that we'd address the service quality agenda. And for me, that's the really important insight, that it is about outcomes, it's about impact, and they're multiple. The same investment can serve multiple purposes. So it can help the health services to get out of its current day-to-day difficulties, whether that's children having their chemotherapy cancelled.
And do you accept the assertion that has been made a number of times across both this morning and yesterday, which is that the presence of research within a health system is beneficial not just in the output of that research, but in the impact it has in direct service delivery for the patient?
Absolutely. Like Robert can talk to that more clearly presently. And it's not just that. People who misunderstand it think that we're going to come up with an innovation that's going to change how the service is seen in that local setting. And sometimes that happens, you get a product out of research. But it's actually the culture you create. The fact that there's a commitment to protocols and evidence infuses the whole delivery system and brings it up a level. And that's really important. And then from our department's point of view, because I should say that, I've fallen back into my old role. From our point of view, it's crucially important that the research informs the teaching and learning, because the next generation that you're going to develop have to be at the frontier of research, and they have to go out with that same infused spirit around research being part of what they want to do with their career.
Same question to you, Robert.
Well, firstly, good morning, everybody, and great to be here, and congratulations to Martin, Martina and Peter for this great initiative, and look forward to seeing the results of it in time, and congratulations to the President as well of the university. I know these things don't happen without the leadership of people coming together and coming up with an idea and seeing a gap or a deficit and pulling people together, so congratulations, and I really look forward to it. I think Jim has articulated, Anton, the many reasons why this is absolutely critical, and we heard it in the presentations this morning, and I'm sure the Institute could have chosen many other examples of how this incredibly new insights into various diseases, chronic diseases, that afflict the population and how the research is leading to new treatments. And that's what it's about. It's about using research, our knowledge, improving our knowledge to help people. In the Department of Health, we talk about long lives, but healthy lives. I think this is a great debate that's now taking place across the OECD countries. We have much higher life expectancy than we ever would have expected 20, 30 years ago. When I was in the Department of Finance as a young economist, we used to produce these forecasts of demography, and we were, needless to say, in the Department of Finance, very pessimistic compared to what's actually transpired. So people are living longer, but the real challenge is the quality of those lives. And it's about long lives, but healthy lives. Yesterday, the CSO came up with data that showed that the population over 70 has gone up by 20%. A lot of older people have various conditions, chronic conditions, and we spoke this morning about one of them, diabetes. Just to give you one example, diabetes, the impact of diabetes in the health system is enormous. A large number of people with the conditions that were set out earlier end up in hospital, very expensive treatment, significant complications, changes in how we can treat people, how we can help them manage their balance, how we can help them to avoid the complications, the extreme consequences of some of those complications, end up in hospital, can drive enormous savings for the health system and improve the quality of life for people. So that's really what it's about, Anton. It's about how we can have the best treatments, the best interventions, the best medicines so that people can, over time, manage their conditions.
But if you take the shared significance and prioritization that you both put on research and on clinical trials, how do you square that with Ireland's position, specifically in Europe's position more broadly? We do not stack up well when compared to nations of similar size when it comes to clinical trials and research.
Yeah, and that may be the case, and that's why an initiative like this is so important, where there is a gap. I think Peter articulated very well, and Martin, if there's a gap, we've identified that gap, we need to do better. And we have great skills and great capacities, both within the education system, the higher education system, and within the health system, and we have the infrastructure. It was very interesting, I think it was Professor O'Brien was talking about the various infrastructure that was put up. Jim and I, in different parts of our career, were involved in some of those policy discussions which led to the funding, which led to those institutions being built. The Irish state has invested in infrastructure, but critically it's invested in the skills of our people, both education and health. And as mentioned, along with the presence we have in pharma in this country and medical devices, we've got great opportunities because we have the private sector with their dynamism and their funding, very, very profitable organisations, very large organisations, along with our infrastructure within the public system and our skills, and that requires the leadership to come together. So we're very supportive, and both departments are very supportive of this initiative, and obviously very delighted to be here, and to work on some of the challenges, and people mentioned some of the slowness of processes or issues around funding, and that's something that we'll certainly take back and reflect upon and see can we do better in respect of those.
Jim, can I pick up on that thing of both departments? Because it has been mentioned as well that in some ways it is, to a degree, three departments, because enterprise obviously plays a role as well. Classically, if you want to create a policy orphan, you make it spread across two departments, so neither is directly responsible. How do you
You're very cynical, Anton. You know that? You're really very cynical. All this positivity, and you introduce an element of cynicism. I just say to you, I don't know how many times Jim and I would speak every week, or how many times we meet every month, or how many times we've met each other over the last year. We are not this silo-wise system that people make out. That might have been the way civil service structures worked in the past. That's not how we work and have been working for some time. We even get on when we meet and try to come out with solutions to problems that both our departments face in the country.
I noticed Jim is remaining silent through all these assertions.
I was going to say a word for the Department of Enterprise. The Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise is retiring on Friday, and her going away is tonight, so she's a good excuse. But Declan Hughes, who will take over, is very passionate. He's actually on the board of SFI and is very passionate about this whole area.
But my cynicism aside, the underlying point, that thing of driving an issue when there isn't a single parent department, is there a risk in that? Is it something that ye 2 and 3 regard as a shared objective for your department?
Yeah, look, and I do agree with Robert. I think so my experience in different departments, the first department I led was the Department of Children. And actually, most of service delivery in respect to children was not in that department. So you have to rethink how you're going to operate as a department in that situation. It's the very same with this current department. the partners we have are the healthcare system, because that's who we're producing graduates for. The Department of Housing, because we're trying to help them to reach their housing targets and getting the skills in place to do it. So we're much more outward focused, much more attuned to what other people's objectives are. We have our own objectives, but really we're in the service of a wider agenda, and this is one that's really important for us as a department.
Is it?
And just to add to what Jim has said, Anton, the big challenge that we face as leaders of government departments is to have the bandwidth to be strategic, because there are so many issues that go on every day. I drove down this morning from Dublin because I had meetings last night, and the number of things that came up that I had to deal with on the phone this morning, and that's a typical day. And the real challenge we all face is to try to be strategic. How can we stand back? So where is the future of healthcare in 5-10 years' time? How will the relationship between health and education going to evolve? And that's why we need leaders to come and say, okay, we have an idea. Can you guys run with this? So we need, across the whole ecosystem, I know it's a bit of a clumsy expression, the ecosystem within the sectors, to be leaders and innovate and challenge us then. Because within any organisation, at the Department of Health, 700 people, the health system, 140,000, the budget's 24 billion. There's so many different issues that we're dealing with. So it's really about everybody within the system being leaders and challenging. And we're happy with being challenged. We're happy with that culture of challenge. And that enables us then to respond and do better to achieve these goals. Because we all believe inherently, and we heard the most recent example of that lady with cancer. So everybody is committed to the same goals. The question for us, how do we break through and show the leadership to make those step changes?
Can I ask on that? Because the strategic element of it, if your cause and effect are close together, it's an easier strategic choice. So if you're saying let's pour money into the IDA and tomorrow we'll get a big multinational and they pay corporation tax. Yeah. If you're taking something...
I don't think it's quite as simple as that, Anton, but I know what you're saying.
I foreshorten some of the intermediate steps. Yeah. If you are taking something like clinical research, clinical trials and medical research, does the system regard that as exclusively a cost?
No, of course it doesn't. We see it as ultimately the product, the outcome, the improved treatment, the improved way of helping people as ultimately something which is of great benefit to the people who benefit from those treatments. We also, in purely economic terms, this is the reality of our world as well, we see it as a cost saving. Because diabetes is a good example of it. As I said, diabetes is very expensive. If people have complications of diabetes and end up in hospital, being in hospital is obviously very expensive. It's not the place where people want to be. Anything which helps that, what we call ED avoidance, hospital avoidance, is a great, because that means then we can allocate money to other better drugs, other treatments, improved ambulance service, whatever it happens to be. So we don't see it purely, we see it in terms of the benefits to the patient, but also the cost effectiveness of treatments. And this is an enormous challenge that we all face. Just to give one example, the drugs budget has gone up to $3.5 billion. It's doubled in the last 10 years. Every month, there are new drugs coming out which can have wonderful impacts for people with conditions. The state has a very difficult job in figuring out which to fund and which not. We can't fund everything. So any step that we can take which can drive efficiency, improve the way we treat people, can then release resources then to provide better services in another part of the system.
Is that a difficult argument to make at a policy level when the easy answer might be, well, look, the trials will still occur and the drugs may still get developed and the practice may still get developed in another jurisdiction. This can be somebody else's problem and we'll reap the benefit anyway.
Well, it's clear there are innovations and developments taking place all across the world. We're a small country, but of course we punch above our weight in this space. And I guess the ambition that the team have set out today, which we endorse and we support, is that we need to do better. And we can do better. And we can do better because we have a track record. There's no point in just saying we're going to establish an institute without the people, without the teams, without the infrastructure, without particularly the wonderful leads who come up with the ideas and galvanise the teams. So we know we can do it because we have comparative advantage, because we have got skills. So that's really why we're in this place, because we actually have those attributes.
Just maybe to add a bit too, so taking it's a huge issue for the health service, but taking the wider country, we see...
Just bring your mic up there a bit, Jim.
We see hugely important how Ireland positions itself. You've just talked about corporation tax, so your differentiation on corporation tax is going to get eroded. How will we position ourselves as a country? And it has to be about talent and innovation. If we're not in that space, then we're competing in the wrong league. So as a country, we have to be able to bring forward talent that people are going to want to come here and locate here because we have that talent, or as Tim has talked about, we have the talent and the innovation to spin out companies and create indigenous enterprises that are going to be sticky and stay here. So it's really important agenda for the health service and for public service delivery, but it's also really, really important for the country's place within a very, very competitive world.
I'm conscious I'm hogging it, so I'm going to ask Peter and Martin to rejoin the guys if they would, and we'll do a panel Q&A. And I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask either Peter, Martin, or Robert, or Jim? This gentleman in the grey suit will take you first, and then the lady in the black, we will take you next. And anybody else, if you fire up a hand, I will come round to you as soon as I spot you, which with the lights and my advancing age may be slightly tricky. Sir, will you give us your name and your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Larry Egan. I'm the head of the medical school here at the University of Galway and a consultant physician in Galway University Hospitals. So I just came from my rounds this morning to come over and join the meeting. It's an absolutely fantastic initiative. My question is more of a comment maybe, but if you could react to it, it'd be interesting. You know, if you look at Sláinte Care and the 8 key principles of Sláinte Care and the reform programme arising from that, research just doesn't really feature very highly at all. So my observation would be that, you know, is what we're talking about today, clinical trials, clinical research, the benefits of having a research-intensive, you know, clinical environment, is that on the political agenda? I mean, is there support? I mean, I think everybody here in this room gets it, but, you know, do politicians get it, and is it prioritized or not at that level?
Thank you. Robert?
Of course the politicians get it, Larry. Of course, how could possibly suggest otherwise? How could you suggest otherwise? No, look, it's not necessarily a core element of Sláinte Care. You're right. Sláinte Care, as you know, encompasses many different reforms and initiatives right across the whole gamut of issues the health system faces. So research, Jim is more involved in Sláinte Care than I was originally, but I don't think research does feature. But in terms of what we need to do, just give you one practical example in your institution. We're aware that attracting in this new contract that we've negotiated, Sláinte Care contract, we know to attract the best people back, and a lot of your colleagues who've gone away who may be thinking about coming back, we need to have hospitals with great working conditions, good pay and all the rest of it, but also which are research focused, which are leading edge. And we know that. We hear this all the time when we talk to prospective consultants. They'll come back to Ireland. Of course, they need to be remunerated properly, the pay needs to be proper, but they want to work in a collaborative environment, they want to work in a research intensive environment, and they want to work in a hospital near a university. So we get this all the time. So while it's not integral to Sláinte Care, Larry, it is absolutely essential, I think, to what we're building. And we're also aware that, as I mentioned earlier, we have all these demands on the system, and you know in your area, endless demands, and we need to figure out how to prioritise what works, what doesn't, and that requires research, it requires clinical trials, it requires all the different evidence. So I think it's an integral part of what we're doing, based on the conversation we're having this morning, and Jim and I can reflect about some of the things that have been said, and we can see, can we augment and build on what we've done to really ensure that it's a much more central part of what we're doing for the future.
Larry, I think, so you're probably right about the cross-committee report that was Sláinte Care. I think there are elements that are baked into the government's response, but you touched on it, Anton, and you have now, Larry. I think there's an elephant in the room, which is the huge service pressure that people are under. And when you're talking about investing time and effort into things when the queues are out the door, that's seen as a trade-off. And that goes right up to the political level. At the political level, there's an urgency to getting waiting lists down, there's an urgency to tackling trolleys. It's the same right across government. The housing crisis, and I'm there trying to say, well, actually investment in research and innovation should be to the fore of your thinking, and people want to build houses. So how do we help people to get out of that? I see it like when you get into a really rough sea, and you have all this white water that's coming over your head, you have to swim a little bit out of it. We have to get a little bit away from that. And research and development is really important in directing where we should go with that. So it's important that there's an articulation of this at every level, at the service delivery level, from universities, from government departments and politicians, that there's a way forward here which isn't about a trade-off. Actually, they're both servicing the same ultimate goal. And investment in this is actually part of resolving service problems.
Okay, Peter, I think you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I just might add one thing briefly to that. I think as an academic community, we also have to do better. We have to be better at telling and explaining why what we do is important. And events like this over the last couple of days, I think, are central to that, because they're shining a light and creating some attention around what we're doing. The fact that both Robert and Jim have joined us today, I think, is also really, really significant, because my sense is that we at least have a system that is listening, but it's still up to us as academics to make sure we tell that story, we make those requests, we be those leaders, Robert, that you mentioned earlier.
Martin?
The concept of research is expensive and it's focused on new treatments that will cost more. A large proportion of research in clinical trial research, the example that was given today, you can evaluate more efficient ways of doing it, shorter courses, right? Less expensive medications, lower doses. So clinical trials, it's not just, and some people get this message, well, if we invest in clinical trials, it's going to cost us more because it's going to be new treatments. Our vision of clinical trials is that it's going to be targeting value-based delivery of care, as well as new treatments.
To take Saeed's example yesterday, where you get an uptake in what is an immediately life-improving, already available therapeutic response. We had another question here, and then have we somebody else who wants to follow? Yes, we have one over here then next. So yes, and then we'll come to you, sir. So we'll get a microphone over here. And again, if you can just give us your name and your question, and then we'll come over to this side. That's okay. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Nicola Wall, A42 Development. So I've worked in clinical research for over 25 years and run a company here in Galway. But actually, and this is wonderful to see, but I suppose my key question is, what is the role for external providers and industry to work together effectively with institutions like this? So Peter, I won't put you on the spot, but it would be great to just get some feedback about the fact that, you know, that this has to be a collaborative process and it has to involve, you know, kind of external experts as well, and or maybe what the vision for that is.
Great. Let me focus on the but part of I won't put you on the spot, but.
Yeah. Happy to take that one, and I'll give firstly a philosophical answer, which is I truly believe that the complex problems that our friends and families, our patients, our society face on a daily basis are way too complicated for individuals, for single groups to tackle on their own. The creation of collaborations, working in multidisciplinary groups, interprofessionalism, is what's needed to solve those problems. These are not simple problems, just like housing, just like climate change. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is we're very committed, and we articulate this within our strategy, to partnering widely. We have a strong track record already of partnering with industry partners. We see those as vital to achieving the step change in research that we want to achieve. We want a partner to leverage their expertise, to leverage their pipelines, but also, and Robert made this point earlier, you know, in industry also is a source of funding for a lot of the clinical research activity that happens in this country and others. So we're right to the fore in terms of partnerships, and again, we see that as a way of solving really difficult problems.
Gotcha. Thank you, Peter. We have a question over here, if that's all right. Yes, sir. Same drill, name and question, please.
John Given, Chief Pharmacist for Galway University Hospitals. This is more of a statement, but there is a huge drug cost saving from my area for clinical trials, because these patients are getting treated anyway. But if they're on a trial, the companies are paying for the standard of care arm or the trial arm. And there's also these patients get their scans, they get everything paid by the drug companies. So there is that advantage. Now, the issue we're having coming down the line that's going to happen is, say, for example, CAR-T drugs. There's 2 of them licensed by the NCCP and approved for funding. We as a country are not going to be able to afford to give everybody those drugs. But if we put people on trials, we basically get them for free. And as long as you have what Martin has originally set up, you have that base core, it's easy to add in these trials on top. Certainly the drug trials are easier to add in on top, the international trials. So there is a huge saving to the state as long as the basic structure is there and consultants are willing to take on trials as PIs and add it in. So it's more of a statement than anything else.
Gotcha. Robert, do you want to react to that?
Jim? Maybe just linking the two things. I agree absolutely, and I think part of the reason I'm here is I think Galway has just a huge opportunity here. People have referred to the ecosystem that surrounds Galway. When you see Dexcom going to Athenry, didn't go to Galway City, you realise just the scale of what's going on over here. And when you see the type of opportunity for BioInnovate, for spin-outs, for all of the investments, the CRF that has happened here, but it has to be, and this is where the ambition of this initiative comes from, it can only be achieved when people realise that what got us here won't keep us here. This is a game that is really moving fast. The technology is moving, the players are moving all around the globe. So the ecosystem has to come together, just as the last questioner had, and all of the elements have to hang together. That's Robert and I, but it is also enterprise. And the university as a pivotal player within that ecosystem is going to be really important, not just for the university, but for everybody who seeks to make a home in this part of Ireland.
Robert, can I get you to pick up on that industry thing? Because obviously you will be dealing with a lot of the big industry players in this space. And we heard yesterday from Novartis, and Novartis's desire to do as much of the way as possible as clinical trials in Ireland. How significant do you think it is as an FDI driver for industry, and how live or concerned are they about clinical trials and research in this country?
So I think it's part of the offering now, the new part of the offering, because as Jim mentioned, things are evolving. So many of these companies that are in the West or other parts of Ireland, we're here for particular reasons. Those reasons evolve. The world changes, technology changes, the next round of investments will be coming. Our competitors out there have new offerings. So this is something else that we can say. We have hospital system, we've got talented people, we've got a university, now we have this infrastructure around clinical trials. And all the time, so I met a company, I mentioned them, it doesn't matter, Abbott yesterday, some of their people were here, and I met them when we were chatting about, again, they're investing in a significant company, 5,000 people in Ireland across a whole variety of areas again. So what is going to keep them, companies like that? It ultimately is our offering, and it's human capital, it's the infrastructure, it's leadership. These are the things that we have to, and we need to keep on improving, looking to the future, being strategic. And as mentioned, the IDA are looking at the cell therapy and cell development. So that again, look to what does the future hold? What are the new technologies? What are the emerging areas? And we need to be there. But of course, we need to have all the different aspects of the offering to make it attractive for those companies.
Peter?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, and I mentioned this earlier about the universities and the academic community standing up and being part of that. I think that's one of the really core elements of what we're trying to do here. Part of our vision is that we're part of that. We see ourselves as part of an Ireland that's progressive, that's trying to make sure we're consolidating our positions. So as we say in our strategy, you know, almost the least of the impact of the Institute for Clinical Trials will be just on the number of clinical trials. Rather, it'll be about how we transform the region and indeed more broadly, how we impact Ireland.
Got you. Further questions, folks? Anybody else? Yes, we have one here in the front, and then I'll come to you next, sir. Yes.
Good afternoon to you all. I'm a case study for all of you as how you can do consortium. Personally, my name is Munir. I'm a co-founder of a company called Genicity, a company that works in a cancer field offering a CAR-T, allogeneic CAR-T. Basically, I'm Arab Palestinians who relocated from Israel through Enterprise Ireland, and we are a case study for all of you. So we have moved all of our innovation to here because of the infrastructure that you all offer. We have faced many barriers as a company, as a founders. The funny thing that we have already moved only 4 months. We are already part of Enterprise Ireland. We moved to Galway University. What we would love to answer, it's a very simple question. How cancer trials over here and the clinical trials see themselves operating with companies that outside of their university? What are their plans for cancer trials for the future? And how the enterprise to bring minds over here. One of the problems that we faced is that we don't have a clear plan, like you're a company that coming here are the operation that you can have, the help that you can have, because everything that you do, you know, you give, there is infrastructure for everything. There is knowledge that you have as an Irish society for everything. It's brilliant, but there is no contacting with each other, and it's give you a barriers. How can you do things? And it will be easier. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Peter, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. And Munir, I know you've reached out, and we're going to be meeting in the next little while. And we can discuss that in more detail. But let me talk about oncology more broadly. And I don't know if you were here for my opening remarks yesterday morning, but I spoke to this specifically. The cancer therapeutics market is anticipated to be $270 billion in the next 5 years. We have seen a doubling of the number of clinical trial starts in oncology over the last 5 years. And at the moment, if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, there's about 20,000 cancer clinical trials ongoing. They've also delivered extraordinary impacts for our patients. You only had to see Kate Cameron's video just beforehand. So we're very committed to supporting, developing, and expanding not just the amount of oncology clinical trials that we do, but also the impact of those. We believe that we should be doing earlier phase, higher impact, higher value to both industry, but also to our patients' oncology trials. We are doing a significant piece of work around that with my colleagues, Michael Curran, also with Professor Aoife Lowry, who will take over as lead of our clinical research facility. So we're building an infrastructure that will certainly prioritize oncology clinical trials, will allow us to engage externally, and indeed we'll be looking to partner with the best so we can deliver the best for our patients.
Okay, I know we have another question here, and then I'll take one more thereafter. We have one down the back, is that right? Okay, so we have this. Was it this gentleman over here want to ask one? Did I miss somebody? Yourself, sir? And then, okay, we'll go one and then two, and that'll be us. Yes.
Michael Kern, it's great to see two of the most powerful people in Ireland up
and
there,
Robert.
up there with
Anton's not that powerful.
with Jim and the other fella at the moment. You're very welcome to Galway, and we're really delighted to host you. And I think we must be on the cusp of greatness. Just from my point of view, I've been here with Tim O'Brien for the last 20 years, and we've made some great progress at levels. And I think some of it has come from the programs from research and third level institutions. It's amazing to come over to this university today. It's where I came through the medical school and where I've invested most of my career and so on. But it's such an amazing, it's been set up to be successful, and you can just see the branding and everything and ability to recruit and develop and so on. Now, the contrast with the physical, people keep talking about infrastructure, right? The physical infrastructure in our hospital is poor. And I'm frustrated because with a lot of great help from a lot of very important people, we've managed to get the cancer centre, there's 4 of them in Dublin, we've managed to get the cancer centre onto the National Development Plan. And what I'd like to ask the two of you is what you would do if you were me to try and create this cancer infrastructure that will allow us to deliver a research-rich, really active, productive program that will allow us to recruit, retain, and develop the next generation of people in an environment with innovation and research at the heart of it. So that's just a question. What would you do if you were me in that setting?
And will you pop that mic over there? And Robert, do you want to come in on that?
So I think, Michael, I think it's accepted that significant investment needs to be made in University Hospital and the health facilities in the city. Everybody accepts that. The Minister Donnelly was here last week. He spoke to your colleagues. I think he gave a commitment in relation to the plans. I think it's accepted that in Galway and in Cork in particular, their infrastructure deficits need to be addressed. I'm here the next few days again talking to your colleagues in the hospital tomorrow and on Friday, and I'll be listening and talking to them about where we go from here. So it's absolutely accepted that the infrastructure is not good enough. And I just make a general point here about planning, and it's something that Jim and I have been involved with for a long time. We're conscious of. In some areas, we've managed to plan very, very well. Like if you look at this institution, I worked here 20 years ago with previous presidents on different plans, and if you look at the motorway network, so it took 2 hours to get from Dublin this morning. If you look at some areas of planning, motorways, higher education, we've done incredibly well. Other areas, and this is not a criticism now of the past, but in health we haven't had the same strategic approach to infrastructure, and we need to do that. And that's what the Minister is committed to doing. And I think there are clear deficits here which we need to address.
I'll just finish in 1 second, guys, by asking Robert and Jim as our guests, given that this is the sort of the inaugural meeting, the kickoff of the Clinical Trials Institute, the final thought I might get from you is the advice that you would give to the Institute so that it can be successful. So we might just finish on that. But before that, we have one final question. Yes.
I'm Bill Potterly. I'm currently in St. Louis, and I was invited to give the keynote yesterday. But in their remarks on the stage before the two Secretary Generals came up, Martin and Peter referred to the NIHR, which is the research arm of the National Health Service in the UK. And it's worth thinking a little bit about the history of that, because the NIHR was started in 2008 after a group of academics led by Sally Davis in London went to the British government and said, the National Health Service, any modern organization, needs to have an R&D function to improve the National Health Service. And they got ring-fence funding. The minister they convinced was not the Minister of Health. It was the Treasury Secretary, Gordon Brown. The NIHR has been an incredible success, not only for the development of academic clinical research in the UK, but also for the improvement in the quality of the NHS, and actually had a worldwide implication because the most rapid, effective COVID trials were done by Recovery, which was led through the NHS. So it's surprising to me, as an outsider, that nobody has really addressed what I would regard as the elephant in the room. And that is, where is the R&D function of the HSE? Why isn't there a ring-fenced funding for R&D in the HSE? Given the size of its budget, given its importance to the future of Ireland, why is that still neglected?
Bill, thank you. Robert?
It's a good point, and it's a good challenge. Like, clearly there isn't an earmarked budget the way you describe, which is relevant in terms of the NHS in the UK. There is research spending, there's research-related activities all across the system, but it's not described as such, and it's not coordinated perhaps as well, and it's not ring-fenced, as you said. But I think it's certainly it's a good argument, it's a good challenge. And if you look at, you mentioned the COVID research, like that research that was done through the NHS was incredibly impactful, incredibly powerful, and we all benefited from that. Like our CMO at the time, and Jim was involved in that when he was in health, like that was really impactful, and that had an enormous benefit to all countries who are grappling with those problems. So no, I think it's a fair point. It's something which we'll come back and we'll talk to our colleagues in the Health Research Board and the other relevant agencies, and it certainly is a challenge, because I think we all accept that research, innovation, new ways of working, new ways of doing things needs to be core and embedded in health service into the future.
And Robert, I recognise that you can't make policy sitting on a stage, but that has been one of the consensus areas that has come up repeatedly, which is that issue of ring-fence funding. So when you say you will take it away, you'll take it away with some enthusiasm?
Emboldened with enthusiasm, Anton, emboldened with enthusiasm. No, I think we just need to be careful about what we understand about ring fences. So in our world, there's a budget, 24 billion, and then it's allocated to different elements. Within the health system, there are allocations across, and within that, there's research activities. It may not be necessarily ascribed or identified as research, but I think the point the gentleman was making, which is a good point, is that within the HSS, there is a greater commitment around a ring-fence budget which is dedicated, and everybody knows that's its purpose. Now, I think it's something to look at, but of course, as everyone knows, the demands are never ending. But it's certainly, I think, something worth exploring. Again, if it makes sense, does it make sense for us? Does it make sense in terms of improving outcomes for patients? That's ultimately the test that we assess it against.
To close us out then, gents, the view from the lofty heights of your Secretary Generalships, the advice that you would give to the Institute, you've heard the ambition that is here. If you were saying, well, look, here's the thing from our perspective and from the government and civil service perspective that we'd recommend, or the bit of advice that we would give. Jim?
Just to go back to Bill's, because I think I agree with the profile that this area has across the water. We tend to now, because of Brexit, pick on our colleagues across the water and think they're doing everything wrong. They've just set up a Science, Technology and Innovation Department. The kind of work that you talked about, Bill, with Sally Davis, the work on genomics that was absolutely crucial when COVID arrived, and that we all drew off. So building out those platforms at scale is something that they're actually willing to do across the water. I don't necessarily, so I think there's a huge amount of work, and I can see Anna Teres and the team doing it in the HSE. There's a huge amount of support that they should get. There's lots of things that the HSE can only do. So the ethics, getting contracts in place, getting processes nailed down. But we have a really great resource in the HRB. We're about to set up a new research and innovation agency, but I wouldn't be for setting up new agencies in a small country over and over. We're bringing two together rather than setting a new one up. I think the HRB does a really good job. I think the challenge for health is to get the HRB and the health service working really well in sync, and the university is contributing to that, and I think there's a lot of rich work to be done on that. When you've asked for advice, and Michael did as well, Michael, I've seen you operating for 20 years with all your energy and your passion. The last thing you need is my advice. My mother used to say, don't teach your granny how to suck eggs. I think Peter and Martin are the same. The importance now is to have ambition, to have the right people, and to be really, really positive in taking on the opportunities that are there. But it's all about ambition. I think that's what the country's crying out for now, and you don't need my advice because you have everything moving nicely, and I'll give you any support we can into the future.
Robert, do you want to give us a final bit of egg sucking?
Yeah, no, I don't give advice either to people who like what I would say, and I think echo what Jim said, ambition is critical, and related to that is don't be afraid to fail. I think within the public sector we have a real problem around failing. You need to fail quickly and move on. And if you don't fail often enough, you're not trying enough, you're not innovating enough. So really, that's, I think, to have the courage to go for things and be ambitious. And that's not advice. That's just a general comment.
Gents, thank you very much. Robert, Jim, Martin, and Peter. You're off the hook, folks. Thank you.